You might have noticed that NBA free agency this year just looked a little bit different. Seemed like there wasn't as much activity, seemed like the numbers were lower. There were players that typically wouldn't have left their incumbent teams like Paul George and KCP that did. But one thing that has not changed about NBA free agency is we always have some winners and some losers. Let's start on the positive side here with the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think they're absolutely a winner of free agency and arguably the biggest winner of free agency. Not only did they bring in Isaiah Hartenstein, who we're going to talk about, but they also were able to bring back Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe on very cheap deals. They had them opt out of their team options and then sign them each to 4-year deals that are going to be really good values over the next couple of years for a team that is going to need some values on the margin, because this team is going to get very expensive very quickly once some of the younger guys get new extensions. But the big one for me, obviously you can count the Caruso trade in their offseason, but for free agency specifically, I think people were underrating just how big of a deal it is that they got Isaiah Hartenstein, because before last year, it's not like he was this big time rotation player. He's kind of a journeyman. He's very good, and he's exactly what Oklahoma City needs. There's some criticism out there in terms of, well, he doesn't provide floor spacing. He's not going to be able to shoot, and everybody that OKC plays, except for Giddey last year, can shoot and create and do a bunch of stuff. That is true. But the thing that people are underrating and missing about Hartenstein is he is a very good passer, and he's a pretty good in-between finisher in the lane as well. And I think OKC is going to be able to figure out a lot of different ways to use that to their advantage, and they just needed this kind of a body type. Like, yes, they could have gotten Clint Capella, maybe Jared Allen, but they needed a guy that was bigger, stronger, and could play alongside Chet. And Hartenstein certainly is that guy. There are going to be games where he plays 20 to 25 minutes, and it's going to seem strange that OKC just paid that guy $90 million over 3 seasons. But if you look at the contract a little bit further, it's been reported that last year is actually either a team option or a non-guaranteed year. And that's really important for OKC because for the next 2 seasons, the roster is still going to be pretty cheap. But when that 3rd season comes up, it's going to be Chet extension time, Jalen Williams extension time. Those deals are going to kick in. And at that point, if they've found a better solution at the 5, or they just want to save some money, have some more flexibility, the Hartenstein contract can be off the books, at least reportedly. So it's not just the player that they're adding, and I think Hartenstein's going to be very good, but it's the structure of the deal as well that is an absolute win for Oklahoma City. And arguably, after the Caruso addition, you could certainly say that OKC is the favorite in the West and potentially in the entire league to win the title next year outside of maybe Boston. Going over now to the losers side, this one's pretty obvious. There's no scenario in which the Clippers are not losers for losing Paul George in free agency. You can talk about the contract, you can talk about the second apron, you can talk about how expensive the roster would have been, the lack of success with Kawhi and Harden, or Kawhi and PG there, and then the injury issues between all 3 of the stars that they have. They're all aging, all this stuff. That's all fine. But they were willing to give Paul George a 3-year max, which would have put them in the second apron, which would have continued to put them on this timeline over the next 3 seasons of counting on Kawhi, PG, and Harden to be healthy. They didn't want to do the 4th year, and because of that, they lose a guy that is still an all-NBA caliber player, despite the fact that he's 34 years old, for nothing. And there is never a situation in which you lose a player of the caliber of Paul George for nothing, and you are not a loser in free agency. Back over to the winner side now is one that, again, I think people are underrating, and it is the Dallas Mavericks. Now, they had a bit of an interesting free agency period because as a part of the Klay Thompson sign and trade, they got rid of Josh Green. They also dumped Tim Hardaway Jr.'s contract. They lost Derrick Jones as well to the Clippers, but I like the guys that they brought in. Quentin Grimes was brought in as a part of that Hardaway Jr. trade. Again, not technically part of free agency. But I think that Klay Thompson and Najee Marshall are going to be awesome for this team. Klay at 3 years, $50 million. We just talked about this yesterday. You can look at the list here. That average annual value is really, really low for a guy in Klay that, yes, isn't the same defender that he once was, isn't the same shot creator that he once was, but is still an outstanding shooter. And he's going to get more efficient even in this system in Dallas, I think, because Golden State just lacked the kind of perimeter creation to get Klay open shots that is going to be, there's going to be plenty of that in Dallas. So I love the move for them. I love the value for them. I think bringing someone in that is a starter for them this offseason was perfect, considering they didn't have a ton of flexibility. And I think Najee Marshall is going to be good too. It sucks that they're losing Derrick Jones, but Najee Marshall, if he can sustain the shooting from last year, is a better 3-point shooter than Derrick Jones and less hot and cold. And that's something that they needed in that series against Boston. There was a lack of 3-point shooting, and they're going to be a little bit worse defensively, especially if, Klay is out there starting alongside Kyrie and Luka. That's a bit of a struggling defensive unit, I would say. But they're able to figure that stuff out last year. I think they'll be able to figure that stuff out this year, and adding more shooting to the team, given their assets that they gave up, given the contracts they gave to these guys, is an absolute win for Dallas. The next one we can kind of do at the same time for a loser and a winner. The loser side of that is Denver losing KCP, and the winner side of that is Orlando getting KCP. It's a 3-year, $66 million deal, and Denver tried to bring KCP back. Ultimately, there was just a little bit more money out there for him than they were willing to pay, and they feel confident in guys like Christian Brown, some of these other guys they've drafted over the last couple of seasons, to be able to replace what KCP provided for them. The problem is KCP provided a ton of durability. He was always playing, and he can guard and shoot, and those kinds of guys at the level that KCP is at, they're hard to come by, and especially if you're a contending team like Denver, to just lose that guy for nothing, there's no way that is a good thing for them. Just like the Clippers, they're trying to pay attention to the second apron, they're trying to pay attention to their overall payroll, and they feel like it's worth the risk to see if some of these younger guys that are making much less than $22 million a year can figure out how to replace that. But that's a big if. We saw how the loss of Bruce Brown impacted this team, and they're trying it again now with KCP. Now, granted, they've been successful in the past, losing guys like Jeremy Grant and then bringing in someone like Aaron Gordon on a good contract. So maybe they'll be able to figure out. They still have Jokic. They're absolutely still contenders. But just like losing Paul George for the Clippers, just losing someone like KCP for nothing is never a good thing. And for Orlando, there were maybe more exciting options for them out there. They had a meeting with Paul George. Klay Thompson was out there for them, but KCP's kind of perfect for them because he's not going to get in the way at all offensively. He's going to guard, shoot, he's going to play a ton, and he's perfect within their starting lineup. They added some other guys as well throughout their offseason that I really like, but the guy that I really want to pay attention to here for them is KCP. I don't mind the number at all because their roster is still pretty inexpensive over the next couple of seasons. They bring back Jonathan Isaac on a deal as well that a lot of people like. I think this was absolutely a fantastic offseason for Orlando, and they positioned themselves to once again be kind of in that top 4, top 5 mix in the Eastern Conference, and as Franz and Paolo continue to get better, maybe even more than that. Let's stay on the winner side here. San Antonio bringing in Chris Paul is just absolutely brilliant. It's a 1-year, $11 million deal. You don't really know if, what Chris Paul is going to be able to provide to you in terms of being out there a ton, but when he is there, he's going to be extremely helpful to the young guards that they have. He's going to provide some competency to that backcourt. The on-off numbers for Chris Paul are still very strong when he plays. And him alongside Wemby is going to be awesome. But the other part of this as well is that is an extremely tradable contract. It is underneath some of these exceptions that some of these teams get. It's not going to be difficult for a team to trade for Chris Paul in the middle of the year. If, for example, San Antonio is not that good at the deadline and a team out there needs point guard help, a team like Minnesota, a team like even Dallas or something like that, having someone like Chris Paul available for trade on such a cheap deal was brilliant for San Antonio. And even if he's on the roster for the entire season, is still going to be very helpful if he is healthy. In the losers section here, I think there are going to be some people defending this one, and that's fine. Chicago giving Patrick Williams 5 years, $90 was a little strange. Now, granted, he's still extremely young. I think Patrick Williams is like 22 years old. Like, he's still extremely young considering he's been in the league for a few seasons, and if he ends up improving, this is great value. I just don't think Patrick Williams does that much for you other than guard a little bit, and he just hasn't improved at all. So to project some kind of improvement over the next handful of seasons to be worth the contract they just paid him, I'm not really buying into. There's still going to be that upside and that potential, but it almost feels like they just gave like kind of what Josh Jackson was the first couple years in the league, a 5-year, $90 million extension. Patrick Williams is a little bit better than that, but I just don't love the idea of bringing attaching yourself to a guy like this, attaching yourself to a contract like this when you should presumably be rebuilding. Now, you never know. It could be great value in a couple of years. It could be a decent trade asset for them. Certainly, I didn't want them to just lose Patrick Williams for nothing, but I felt like maybe there was a sign and trade scenario for them out there, something like that. 5 years, 90 feels like a lot for Patrick Williams. One other one in the losers section is just teams that didn't do anything. So Milwaukee and Miami are the two teams listed here. There are other teams around the league as well, but these two teams are ones that I'm keeping an eye on. Now, granted, they didn't have a ton of opportunity to sign guys, right? Like Milwaukee made their big move last offseason by trading for Damian Lillard. They got expensive players all over the roster. Miami, same thing. They've got expensive players everywhere. They're trying to figure out their own Jimmy Butler situation. But when you look at the rest of the East, when you look at Orlando, and of course Boston's coming off winning the title, Philly adds Paul George, the Knicks add Mikal Bridges. There's other teams throughout the conference that just added players. It almost seems like the conference is kind of passing each of these teams by, which is just never a scenario that you want to be in. And even though there weren't great chances for them to add guys, there was no sign and trade aggressiveness. There was no, hey, let's shake up the roster in any way. And I'm just kind of keeping an eye on those two teams in terms of like, if they get to the trade deadline and they're 5 games over 500 or something and the rest of the conference is way above them, do we start to look at this offseason as the point in which they basically decided it's just not worth it to continue to improve the teams? And of course, for Milwaukee, that is a massive deal in terms of the future of Giannis. And for Miami, they're also worried about the future of Jimmy Butler. So 2 other teams to keep an eye on there as we talk about the winners and losers of free agency this year.